NHS staff are at a risk of high rates of post-traumatic stress disorder if they don't receive the right support as the coronavirus outbreak subsides. Charlotte Rose has more.
Schools in England are counting down the days until some pupils could return to the classroom on the 1st of June. But teaching unions say their members want reassurance about the risks of transmission of the virus between children and adults. Schools are already taking measures like increased cleaning, reducing class sizes, staggering the start and end of the school day for different groups of pupils, and creating one-way systems around their sites. But teachers are asking why the government is recommending people wear face masks on public transport and at the supermarket, but not in schools.
We've always said that we very much hope to see schools returning on the week commencing the 1st of June, and we'll continue to work with unions but also many other school bodies to make sure that schools return in a phased, considered and controlled way, making sure that the safety of both children and those who work in schools are our top priority.
Later today, Welsh First Minister Mark Drakeford is due to set out plans for the easing of the lockdown in Wales, but emphasising the need for continued caution. Unlike the UK, he won't be setting out a timetable for lifting restrictions on schools and businesses. But like England, it's expected to use a traffic light system based on the rate of infection. Although that rate is slowing across the 4 nations of the UK, yesterday's figures showed 428 people had died from COVID-19 in the past 24 hours, taking the total to 33,614.
The swab goes right to the back of the throat.
The results of a swab test survey on 11,000 people in England showed that around 1 in 400 people are currently infected, around 0.27% of the population. New figures released by NHS England also revealed that more than a quarter of all those who've died from coronavirus had diabetes, although we don't know whether this was type 1 or type 2. Last night, thousands of people came out once again to clap for carers. It was the 8th week that people took to the streets to mark their appreciation for workers on the front line. Across the UK, and from up high and below deck, people showed their support for those still battling against the virus. Charlotte Rose, BBC News.
We can talk to our political correspondent Ian Watson this morning. Ian, good morning to you. Quite a lot to cover. Gavin Williamson has been taking a look at education.
That's right. I think more proof, Naga, this morning that it's much easier to impose a lockdown than to get out of a lockdown, because what the government said they were going to do in England from the beginning of next month was to have a phased return to primary schools. Some year the youngest pupils and the oldest pupils in primary schools returning. But the teaching unions have been saying that it isn't safe to do so, or at least they're not convinced that it's safe to do so. So there is an attempt to try to get them on board today by inviting them to meet England's chief medical officer and other experts so they can talk about the potential risks in the classroom and how to manage them. And writing in the Daily Mail, the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, says that everyone in education has a duty to try to get children back into school. He said that he agrees for once with a former Labour Education Secretary, David Blunkett, who said that it would be disadvantaged children who would suffer the most if they don't go back to school. But equally, though, Gavin Williamson has to reassure parents as well as the trade unions, because some of them will be worried about sending children back into school, worried about whether they could catch or spread the virus. So again, he's stressing throughout that this is going to be a very careful move. He uses that word careful several times and says, look, there'll be new measures in place, difficult to socially distance with young children, but they'll be in small groups, there'll be new hygiene measures. So he has to make sure that children will be sent back to school by their parents if they reopen, and he has to get the unions on side if they're going to reopen in the first place. And one of them is suggesting that the government could face legal action if they breach a duty of care to teaching staff.
OK, Ian, thanks very much.
Transport for London has secured a £1.6 billion bailout from the government to keep services running until September. Not everyone is happy.
Ben's in our newsroom for us in London this morning. Good morning, Ben. It's a contentious issue, isn't it?
Yeah, morning to you both. You're absolutely right, £1.6 billion, it's a lot of money. But this came after Transport for London now. That's the body that represents all transport across the capital. Yesterday said it was in danger of running out of money if it didn't get a bailout by the end of the day. So we know the government has stepped in to the tune of £1.6 billion. About a third of that will be made up of a loan. The rest is a direct bailout, but one that Londoners will eventually end up paying back through higher fares. It's thought that fares could rise by 1% above inflation to pay for this cash injection. Now, that itself does directly go against a promise from the London Mayor Sadiq Khan not to raise prices for public transport, but he said he has little choice given the collapse in demand for services as a result of coronavirus. Passenger numbers down 95%, clearly hitting revenues for the service. And just to give you a sense of the scale of it, the staggering scale of the Transport for London network, 5 million passenger journeys every single day on the tube. There are 19,000 bus stops, more than 650 routes with 9,000 buses. And they say because there are simply not the people on those buses and trams and tubes, they simply cannot afford it. Now, quite understandably, there's been reaction across the country because, once again, money being spent on the capital. We know the Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, saying, look, this announcement still, while Greater Manchester waits for a few million. That was his tweet last night. And Andy Street, he's the Mayor of the West Midlands. He's been asking for money for the city's trams and buses, and again saying it needs just a few million to keep those running. So they will now be joining the queue once again for government money. Now, the government says it has offered money to keep those services running, but nonetheless paling into insignificance compared to £1.6 billion for London's transport network.
OK, Ben, thanks for taking us through that. Pubs in some Australian states have reopened today with strict hygiene and social distancing rules in place in a bid to restart the country's economy.
Let's find out more from the BBC's Sharma Khalil, who's outside a pub in Sydney. Sharma, paint us a picture of how the reopening is working.
Well, it's quite a rainy day, so we actually came inside. They allowed us in. But yes, after weeks of restrictions, people have finally been allowed to come in, have a meal and enjoy a drink. We're at the Royal Albert, a local pub here in a central Sydney neighbourhood. And while we can't take you inside the dining area because it's at full maximum 10 people capacity, I can tell you that we can hear them laughing quite loudly. People have been telling us how excited they are to be here. But the rule is that only 10 people are allowed at a time. And they've been fully booked here all day, actually turning people away. That's how excited people are about being out and about. But yes, cafes, restaurants, pubs like this one, even places of worship all have to stick to social distancing measure, to hygiene rules as well, and serving 10 customers at a time. A big day for families as well. Playgrounds are open, so it's back to the swings for many children. And while it's not business as usual, it is slowly moving to steps towards easing the restrictions. Health officials did say that more cases are expected because of the increased movement of people, but generally Australia is doing much better. And while New South Wales is opening, states like Victoria, for example, won't lift the restrictions before the end of this month.
And Sharma, little things take on kind of new importance, don't they? Hairdressers, for example, I understand have opened up out there and caused a bit of a stir.
Yes, hairdressers are opening, and I shouldn't really point to my hair, but I am in a bad need of a haircut as well. It is all about the social distancing rules. It's all about the hygiene rules, and staff could be seen wearing masks as well. And it's all about making sure that people, when they're doing their hair appointments or getting their hair cut, that they're safely at a distance from each other. But mostly businesses have been telling us how excited they are about opening up. I must say, however, that we did speak to some pub owners and cafe owners who say despite being allowed to open, serving 10 people is just not financially viable. So they will remain close to the customers and will continue with takeaways.
Sharma, for the moment, thank you very much. Sharma Khalil reporting from Sydney for us this morning.
The NHS must have an adequate supply of personal protective equipment and rapid testing in place for services to reopen safely. This is what health unions are warning. NHS England has told hospitals to restart routines and non-urgent operations which were put on hold during the pandemic. The government has said it is working around the clock to provide more PPE.
So even if we can't take in some culture during the pandemic, at least some creatures can enjoy a nice day out.
Shall we show you 3 Peruvian penguins? Here they are, from Kansas City Zoo in the United States. They were given a day pass to tour a museum at their leisure. Zookeeper said it was a chance to boost their spirits because they're missing social interaction. Although what confuses me about this story is who are they going to socially interact with in a museum, Charlie?
Well, each other.
But
each other, just in a different environment. And what we don't know is what particular images or artwork they were drawn towards. Yeah, well, there you go. They're probably looking for the pool, aren't they? For the the pond.
Just ridiculous.
I mean, that's really what they're looking for.
But you know what? The joy of seeing penguins this morning.
Can't go wrong, can you?
Can't go wrong.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.